Started. Welcome everybody to our webinar today. I'm extremely excited to have a very special guest, Kristen Cusack from LHM Partners. And Kristen and I actually met at a very wonderful conference that we're about ready to go back to again. I can't believe time has flown very fast. It's called the Age Management Medical Group meeting, and I got to meet Kristen at that and just absolutely fell in love with the initiative that they have at LHM Partners. So Kristen will tell you a little bit about LHM Partners, but today's webinar is ultimately going to be about increasing and really increasing the valuation of your practice, but even knowing like how do you even determine what the value of your practice actually is? So she is an expert at this. She's done this for decades, and she's put together a great presentation for us. So, Kristen, I am going to hand it over to you. And again, we're recording everybody, so we'll send out the replay shortly thereafter. If you have anybody on your team that wants to watch the replay, we will go ahead and send that out here shortly. So, Kristen, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Sherry. And I'm really excited, and I'm very glad that I got the chance to meet you at AMMG. And I just am excited to be in front of this group for the first time. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And for those of you who are watching later, I'm glad that the information is valuable to you and really excited to share it. So like Lori said, I'm from LHM Partners. I'm the CEO of LHM Partners. And what LHM is a group, it's a partnership of doctors in the longevity, lifestyle, and hormone space. So, covering all of that ground. That really is specifically about helping those practices to come together and potentially sell in the future, and also understand how to grow, what it takes to have a strong valuation. And our whole idea is really, instead of a big group coming in and buying practices and then partners losing control and not really getting the high valuation for their practice, our idea is that we partner together, and together we're stronger and we can continue to do practice the way that we know it should be for the betterment of our patients and for the way that doctors want to practice and nurse practitioners and PAs. So it's a really exciting initiative, and I really am passionate about the space and how we're doing it. So today's webinar is really about how the process of valuation works. Something that's really interesting to me is that recently we got, I've heard from several practitioners that they've been approached by different groups asking about valuation, asking or talking about whether they want to sell. And so, it's really been interesting, because before this last few months, or last month and a half or so even, I hadn't really been hearing that. And most people were not even aware of what I was talking about. So I'm really happy to share this information, because one of the things I know is that once that process starts, people can really get bombarded and they don't necessarily understand the process as it's happening. And it can really cost them and make the process more difficult. So I want to go through that. So why does valuation matter? So first I want to talk about what valuation is. And that's really understanding what your practice is worth, were it to be sold or any other kind of reason that I have here, whether you're going to sell, you're going to form a partnership, a private equity group approaches you, or you even want to have a loan. To understand really what your practice is worth is not just a simple calculation of, I bring in X money. It's really understanding what goes into that calculation. And it's important because, again, as I mentioned, whether or not you're being approached by various groups in order to that might want to buy you, or you think you want to continue to expand, there's a lot of different reasons why knowing what your value is and being able to understand if someone maybe takes a slightly different approach, what that does to valuation. So we're going to cover that today. So first thing that you have to do if you're going to figure out your valuation is actually gather some information. So these are the things that you'd be asked for. So you've kind of turned your head here to look at what they are. But if you look at this, it's the balance sheet, your profit and loss, or your P&L, and then your general ledger, which is also called the GL. And so really these three documents are what will form the basis of any calculation that we do. A couple other terms, and I'm throwing these terms out there because people will throw them at you, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable with what they are when you're asked. and the other one is TTM, or trailing 12 months. Anyone's going to try to, and the most recent valuation for your practice is using the trailing 12 months. Sometimes when I'm just trying to get someone a sort of sample or an understanding of what their practice is worth, I'll use previous year. So potentially you could use 2024 because you've got a full year. And if you have some cyclical things that happen, it'll give you a sense of where you are. And then you can also compare it to the next year and see how you've changed. So there's a few different ways to do it. But if someone's actually looking to purchase your practice, or you're looking to have the most up-to-date valuation, it's that trailing 12 months. So the previous 12 months to when you're actually speaking or trying to do it. All of these documents should be available to you through QuickBooks, if that's what you use, or through your accountant. So these are things that you should have easy access to. And if you don't, for some reason, that's a great question to ask, and something that you should find out, because these are sort of the backbone financials of your practice. And just checking real quick to make sure I don't have anything in the chat for questions. So, oops, I went too fast. Okay, so now I'm going to throw out a whole bunch more terms here on this sheet, and I tried to, explain these different terms as we go. Some of these things you probably heard, but the first one is EBITDA. This is a term that I see more and more mainstream all the time, and people throw it around like it's an actual word, but it's actually an acronym for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Got to say that one slow. And that is really a proxy for profit. And so it's what you earned after or before these things overall. So you're basically taking your total revenue. So that's that TTM, or trailing 12 months of revenue. And then you're subtracting out the expenses, excluding the things in EBITDA that I just mentioned, so that you're not including interest, taxes, depreciation, or amortization. And then you're adding back some things. And that's what I like to call sort of non-standard expenses. And those are things that may be in your, maybe you may be running through as part of your business, but aren't the usual course of business. If, let's just say, an organization was owning the group or something like that. Those things I think are easiest described as things like the car. If the car is going through, and that's a really common thing for people to put through their business, can make a case that you're using the car somewhat for business or for meetings. However, from a standard expense, it's not generally considered standard, or the gas that you put in that car or things like that. So that's something that if you wanted to talk more about, I can absolutely discuss with you. But that just gives you an idea of kind of how you figure that out. And then adjustments that you also may subtract are things like retirement or insurance. And the reason that these are then subtracted from value is because, again, in the normal course of business, if a larger organization was going to own the practice, or if another person was going to own the practice and they wanted to offer benefits or retirement or things like that, those things would be an additional expense. So again, it lowers the value of the practice. So you've got these things, you've got this total revenue, then you're taking out the expenses, not including the things from EBITDA. You're adding back into the value things that are non-standard expense. And then you're subtracting back out some things that should be standard expense if you don't have them currently. All right. Whoops, I didn't mean to go back yet. So for that, then that is going to give you your EBITDA. And then once you take your EBITDA, you multiply it by the multiple that you've been offered, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then that gives you your valuation. So this is, what I'm saying, the simplified. I know it seems like a lot of terms and different things that I'm throwing around, but that's the simplified version. Is if you know what your EBITDA is, or the value, or the profit of your practice, then you can multiply that times a multiple, and that will give you your practice value. A multiple is calculated by the value that someone is essentially willing to pay. That's what I have written here. And so that really is easy to think about in terms of, if that's, you'll hear people say they got it at 5x, or they got it at 10x, or whatever the number, that x is the multiple. And so basically they're saying to you that out of the practice is making this much every year. So I'm actually willing to pay a multiple of that, because I know that there's going to be future earnings on this practice. And I also think that I'll be able to increase the value even further past that. That's what someone's saying, because I'm willing to. So if someone's just paying 1x, or what your EBITDA is, it's almost like an assumption that the practice is only going to have 1 year of value. And that's really not true, right? Your value, the reason someone would be purchasing it at all is because they're seeing an extended value over time. So they're essentially paying you for that with the multiple. So hopefully that has become a little bit more clear. And again, I think that's something that it helps to sort of think through over time, and even start, writing some things down of your numbers, because that's where these things really start to make more sense. So I did want to put in here, just so you understand, because as I mentioned, hearing that more and more people are getting calls and things like that, I think to myself, well, that means that they're getting people who are going to do a detailed analysis of their valuation. And if you really wanted to know the specifics, I kind of put in an example of a worksheet that I use to start to get this information together, and then really helps you to sort of understand how you would take that. But the page before, that's the basic sense for if you wanted to do a quick back of the napkin, you could do it using that information. This is saying, if we want to get into a bit more detail, we can go through and say, okay, so here's my revenue over the last 12 months, as you can see in this document to the right, and the expenses that I had, and then and then what it is prior to adding add backs. And then this worksheet on the bottom is how I basically calculated whether or not there's what the add back is. And that could be either adding in additional costs that wasn't being the normal course of business, or taking out costs that is something that isn't necessary for the business to run either. So we put these amounts in. So for example, if the owner pay is above the normal amount, meaning that the practice, so someone who is looking to purchase your practice would say, this is what a physician or a nurse practitioner or a PA in this space, in this location, this is what it would take to hire someone. That's the cost of salary that they would put in there, or salary that they would negotiate with someone. And then if the salary that you're being paid is above that, then that would be an add back to the value of the practice. So any of these other things, if there's something that's just well above and beyond that, the salaries are much higher, or you're using additional contract labor that wouldn't be necessary in the future, you can see a list of things that I've put here. Let's just say you're paying a really large amount for rent, but the rent really could be negotiated to a more standard for what's customary for the area and location. So there's just a lot of different things. Sometimes you might say, oh, well, we can negotiate lab fees to be this, or we can save. There's some different things in here that you'll see that could potentially be add backs. And then I also specifically put up on the top there insurance and retirement benefits, and because normally you take that as 20 or as a percentage, and so those are just percentages to use as benchmarks, but you can put the actual numbers in. If you have the actual numbers, it's obviously a lot more accurate. So what you're doing here is taking what I mentioned on the previous page and this calculation, and then you're making these add backs and adjustments much more granular. You're really getting into the detail of what they are. This is where, if you're ever working with a private equity group or some other group that's looking to purchase you, this is where things can be different. And so some people can choose. Sometimes people will say it's a little bit art and a little bit science. And in my opinion, it's neither. It's just math. And so you really should be clear on, this is an actual value. This is something that should be taken out or added back in, or it shouldn't. And that's where you really need to understand what is important, what makes your business run, what are the things that are going to affect the future value of your practice? Because that's what someone's buying with valuation. And then really understanding what that means. And so that's what this more detailed look allows you to do. And feel free, if you've got questions, to pop those into the chat. I think that I've got a few questions in here, and one, is, how, if somebody wanted to get a valuation or somebody really wanted to, from this information, certainly you could reach out to me, and I'll be able to talk you through that, and certainly can help people to do it. That was one question that came up. Did you have something too, Lori?
Yeah, I had you might be getting into this. I had a couple
Oh.
questions about just in evaluation. So personally, I've gone through evaluation a couple of times. And so right now we're talking about selling a practice. But in the scenario that I had previously had a business partner.
Mm-hmm.
And it came a time where we decided he was going to leave and I was going to buy him out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to go through evaluation at that point. And in that point, we're almost trying to do the opposite. We're trying to make our evaluation come in as low as possible
Yes.
because we want to pay that person the minimum amount that we possibly can to get full ownership of, in my case, it was a business. In this case, it would be a practice. So was just curious your thoughts on that. I mean, because obviously math is math is math, but I think there's a couple different scenarios when you want your valuation obviously to be high when you are selling, but then maybe you want it to be low in other scenarios. Because I'm sure there are also situations where you have like a group practice, right? And there's multiple owners, and maybe one person really, really wants to eventually sell the practice and another person doesn't. And then it's like, okay, well, you know what? We need to part ways kind of thing. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And so, yes, it's still math, but the math is really, I turned back to this page just because this is where that changes, right? This is where those elements that you're talking about become a discussion. Whereas, when you're just talking about this is how much we made, this is how much we spent, and this is the EBITDA. And then it's in add backs and adjustments where there becomes some question of whether it is one or the other. So that's the only place where there should be any discussion. The other things should be things on the balance sheet, things that are fact, right?
Right.
Here, the numbers are still fact, and so the math is still math. But whether you choose or not to say it's an adjustment or it's an add back, or it is definitely up for discussion. So, for example, if you're saying, "Hey, this is what I think." It was reasonable to be paid. In the case that you're talking about, you may be saying, well, this is what was paid. So this is what this is the value of that. And so that may keep the value lower because still the practice is only earning X. But that person may say yes, but now you're earning that. So, that's
there's definitely a lot of back and forth that goes. And that's why I think this is important to understand those questions that come up, because these are questions that become part of that negotiation piece of it. And the more information that you have, the better equipped you're going to be able to get the maximum that you want.
Yes, that's a great point.
And I won't ask you my next question about increasing the valuation until I let you go through your slides, but
okay, we'll go to that. Yeah. So, but I think that's a great question. I appreciate it. And so any of these in here, you need to really understand, why do you have the expense? And do you see that as an ongoing expense? Because again, flipping that, what you just said, you're looking for a lower valuation. In the case of if I'm selling it to someone, I'm looking for a higher valuation. I want to say, hey, that's really should be an add back. That's not a normal course of business expense. I want to put that back into the value, because that value number is then multiplied by the multiple. And so in that case, it becomes an exponentially higher number, right? Mm-hmm. So that's super important, even when it seems like it's not that much money. If you're going to multiply it times 10 or 12 or what, depending on, again, what the multiple is, it's a bigger deal. So
yeah,
great.
Okay. Thank you.
So to get on to what Lori was about to ask about is, okay, so now if we know what the value is, let's talk about a little bit about ways to increase the value. And obviously, Lori has a lot of expertise to share in this area as well. And so feel free to jump in, Lori, at any point in time, and Sherry. But really, there's a few different things. Again, you're looking at, how do I change that number? So that EBITDA number is what we're looking to change here, so that then I can increase the overall value of whatever it's multiplied by. It also can help you with the multiple because the bigger and more stable and strong your practice, the more potential for a higher multiple. So you can really affect both of those numbers through some diligence and some work with your practice. So adding new service lines and understanding, hey, what's going to bring great top line, to bottom line value to my practice, but then also be something that adds stability because now I have additional sources of revenue and ongoing streams. And if one slows down or changes a bit, I've got others that are bringing in more value or continuing to increase. So that's a great way to do it. Targeting your marketing efforts. And again, that's part of some of the reason that some of you might be working, with Medical Marketing Whiz and, finding some ways to do that. But enhancing those efforts, bringing in new patients, again, the total number of patients you have can also help with your multiple because while, again, you're seeing a certain EBITDA, that stability of a large patient base makes a big difference as you're being evaluated. Marketing to existing patients. If you've added new service lines or if you've got service lines that people aren't taking advantage of, you've got a great audience there of people who are already interested in their health, already know that they're willing to pay for those services that are important to them. And I think really understanding what can cross over and how you can do that makes a lot of sense. There's some just great tools out there now. And again, as we keep using AI in new and better ways, there's ways to really evaluate what are the things that might be of interest to someone if they're interested in one service, and really going through your patients and helping them with those additional areas that they could be helped. Adding another provider is another area. Understanding that again there's some short-term cost to that. But it can be a huge way to increase the stability and the long-term strength of your practice and certainly increase your overall revenue. At some point as a practitioner, you will tap out and kind of hit that revenue peak unless you have different revenue streams, whether they be from a different service line or another way that you could add that. Or if it's from a new provider. And I know, Laura, you mentioned something earlier today when we were talking about that for additional revenue streams.
Yeah. So another one, and Sherry and I actually did a webinar on this probably 6 months ago or so, are membership programs, and especially in longevity, wellness, even in aesthetics. Um, Practices that have a recurring revenue model will significantly impact your valuation because, again, if you're an investor and you're thinking about buying practice A or buying practice B, and practice A has a membership program and they have X number of patients in it, and they know that they have this solid amount of revenue coming in every month versus the practice that doesn't offer a membership program and they're having to start from ground zero every single month to pay their bills. So we found that practices that have a membership program, they can cover all of their overhead, everything to keep the lights on in the practice every single month. And then on top of that, now everything else that they're doing is gravy. So the membership programs, I'd be curious to see your opinion on that. At least that's what we've seen on our end. And even again, as I went through my own valuation of my company, that was one of the questions that got asked, how many of your clients are on a month-to-month program versus how many of them are on a retainer? And if I have more people on a retainer, that increases the valuation of my business. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great point. And so again, and you're absolutely right in something that proves longer term value, right? So as much as there's a stability and a strength in having a group of patients that we know are paying every month, and at least for whatever the term of the contract, maybe it's a year or whatever it is, that ongoing revenue stream, that strength of having that base are all things that add to valuation. They do give you that bottom line or EBITDA number, but they also give you some strength in the argument for how many times multiple should we make this practice, right? So I think that's absolutely, it does both, and definitely a great thing to consider as well. Most
And
certainly.
then another question that I have just on the new service lines. I'm curious your thoughts on that. So again, speaking from my personal experience, we added a new service line to our marketing program this year. We added answer engine optimization. We were getting into all of the AI stuff and getting practices recommended by ChatGPT. And so that was one of the new services for 2025. We added a medical marketing whiz. And I can tell you it significantly contributed to our growth this year, which was awesome. My overall cost to be able to add that service is very low, right? It's just having another team member that can do that service. I don't really have any capital involved. The thing that I see with a lot of practices is that they think to add another service line that they've got to buy a $200,000 piece of equipment. And so while yes, you're adding a service line, you're also adding debt.
Yes.
Now, I would also argue that maybe that capital is there's some value in having that piece of capital. And if you buy the practice, you now have this piece of capital. So I'm curious of your thoughts on that, like adding a service line. When is it a good idea to do that with a piece of capital equipment? When is it to say, like, for example, you're offering bioidentical hormones, maybe you're only doing it for women, you decide to do it for men. That's not really an additional, big capital outlay for you, but you're able to add a service line.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's actually a few things to consider in that regard. So, number one is to really do, again, the math equation on what's the true value to your practice and being really aware. And this is not to disparage anyone who's selling the products, because there's some great people
Yeah.
out there, and there's some great products that actually really increase the value of your practice and value add for your patients, most importantly. But I would not have that person be the person who's doing my math for me, because I think it's really important in any case like that, that it's sort of, disinterested third party, you or someone who's a disinterested, someone like an accountant or an advisor, helps you look at those numbers and say, did these numbers really track with what we're seeing in the market? Do I understand that there is a market for this? And do I think that the pricing, as it's been stated in this, in what the person has shared with me, is accurate and something attainable in my market? And if I use that math and the numbers do bear out, is that worthwhile for me? And then the next piece of that equation is how long, because it's going to take some time, right? So if it's a $200,000 piece of equipment, you're going to be paying that for a very long time. And so how, does the extended view of the value of this look really good? Like, it will continue to get better and better. And even when I pay this off, I'm still getting some residual value from that piece of equipment, or whatever the different, measures. Because while having a piece of equipment could help be part of enhancing your value, having the additional debt is debt. So it's not going to, that's so then, and if it's debt on a machine that is actually not serving the practice, well, that's worse, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you want to be really careful. So if you're looking to do any kind of exit sooner, then you want to be even more wary of that, because you don't want to have just, debt on your books that is not actually increasing value. So you want to be super careful that you don't have it. And if you do have something that's, sitting in the back room for a long time, or, those kinds of things, figuring out how to get that finished. Like, can you sell it to someone? Is there a market, whatever, is there a way to remove that debt from your books if it is not actually bringing in value to the practice? Or do you need to go back to the marketing drawing board and figure out how to bring in the patients that are needed for that? So
I
there's
think that's the biggest thing is, like, you're right. There's absolutely great pieces of equipment, but don't buy it without a marketing plan. Like, you have to have a plan to get that thing paid off as quickly as possible.
yes.
So I would echo that. The other thing that I did want to mention, just on increasing revenue, again, having gone through this myself, think about a few different things. Number one, your Google reviews. So you having a lot of 5-star Google reviews also it's part of you having a strong brand, having a strong online reputation, and that also can increase the valuation because people want to buy a practice that already has a great online reputation. There's value in that, right? Versus somebody that, you're buying a practice that has 3 Google reviews, like, that kind of looks like nobody goes there, and they're going to have a lot more work to get that up and going. And then also any sort of awards, like things that set you apart. Like, is your practice winner of a top doctor award, or you're a member of a certain society? It to me, a lot of that it is more branding, but branding and and market leadership in terms of you being that go-to, longevity medicine doctor in your area also can help with the valuation.
Yeah, I mean, not only can it help, Lori, bottom line is that that is what someone is buying. They
Right.
are buying the brand and the reputation of that practice. And so that is 100% the right direction. I mean, you having, again, anytime I'm evaluating a practice, one of the things that I'm early on looking at is their Google reviews and their, any other kind of public review that will tell us that, yes, this is a practice that enjoys a great reputation, that, is doing good things and is recognized. So all of those things and any kind of credentials and specifically the reputation of the practice are critical components. So that makes a big difference. And as especially in things like Google reviews or Facebook or any of those kinds of things, its volume is really important because otherwise, I've seen practices where they have a great star rating, and then one person has a bad experience in it, and it impacts their star rating because they just don't have that many.
Right. Point. Yeah.
So you really do need the volume, and that's also very meaningful. Again, if I see someone has, a 5-star, but there's 15 reviews, that's not really telling me very much. I'm not really getting, a true picture of their reputation. So those are really important things. I would agree. So
Okay.
thanks.
Awesome.
Great
Yes.
questions.
Thank you. All right. I'll be.
Yeah. No, that was great questions. I appreciate it. And so, I think, you've got the picture on, overall increasing revenue. Also, you can decrease expenses. And again, you want to be careful with this because too much of a decrease in expenses in a trailing 12 months will actually be something people will look at and ask a lot more questions about. So you don't want to just cut things out just to try to cut expense, meaning sometimes people will, oh, I don't need this staff, or I won't pay for this anymore, or, those kinds of things. And so there may be some really legitimate things. You may not need as much staff for whatever reason. Maybe you've been able to replace some of those functions that were done before and do them digitally or electronically. Maybe you've just restructured and you're able to do things in a more lean way. But just be aware that just cutting to just sort of try to get this expense to show up is not going to help, because there's a historical look of what's going on with the practice, and there will be questions about that. So just make sure you're really maximizing your clinical time. You're using it to the best of your ability in both your clinical and non-clinical. Negotiate fees with wherever you can. Look for partners who can help you do that, and help you understand ways to really maximize the value that you have. And, really I'm always surprised when I walk through with people their whole financials, how many don't really know or didn't know that they were spending such a huge percentage of their dollars on supplies or staff time. And, are they getting the value from that? So there's definitely a lot of things to answer there. Lori, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing that I found, again going through this myself, like software that's duplicated. Like I got two different things that do the same darn thing, like just I think even just this whole presentation that you've given, Kristen, it just at least for me, motivates me to go back through and let's just like do some housekeeping in our books
Mhm.
and figure out where we're wasting money. And this can really help even as you go into the next 12 months, just being more like lean and smart with how you're spending your money, and making sure that you're not duplicating things, and that you've got a plan to dust off that old device that hasn't been doing anything, and let's get it going again. And so yeah, this is awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's actually a great way to look at it. Just, are you doing that kind of, spruce up, spring clean, or, just taking a look and evaluating. I do find that the valuation exercise in general does shine a light in a few places, because I can say to you, well, normally someone's spending about 3% of their revenue here, and, you're at about 6. So maybe, there's probably some opportunity there. And so there's the things that we can kind of look at. And sometimes it may be that it's just a bigger expense where you are and you've chosen that and it makes sense for you, but knowing it, I think, is the big
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Just making it a choice as opposed to, I love the idea of the software. That's happening to all of us. I think about things I personally have where I'm like, I'm still paying for that streaming that I, I don't watch at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, yeah,
So
we had like two different CRM systems that were kind of doing the same thing. It's funny though. I mean, and again, I know I'm the marketing lady, so of course I have a marketing bias here, but I will tell you another thing that I think you've really driven home is marketing increases the valuation of your practice. Now, do you want to be doing marketing that's just like busy work and it's not actually producing revenue? Well, no, of course you don't want to do that. But investing in your Google reviews, making sure you're positioned as the brand leader in your local area, making sure you have a strong patient acquisition strategy. Those are all things that are going to help increase the valuation of your practice and ultimately, bring you more patients. A lot of times what we'll find is every year when people do their spring cleaning, the first thing that they go to cut is marketing, and that's like cutting your legs off.
yeah.
Like there's other things that you can do to, and that's really why I think booking a call with you would be a great idea because you can go through a lot of this stuff and uncover, some areas where, right, just like you're saying, hey, are there better fees that you can be negotiating with vendors? And when you're part of something like LHM, you've got that more buying power to have stronger negotiation strategies with some of these vendors and so forth. So, yeah, this has been awesome.
Well, good. Well, and I do want to say that if you, on the evaluating and the marketing, thinking about, if you're saying, well, look, what I hear a lot is, well, I'm not, I don't know if I'm getting anything for that. That's what people, they'll say, I don't know if I'm getting anything. I know I'm spending it, but I'm not sure. Well, that's then the time to go to your marketing partner and determine, hey, why don't I know? What do we, and if they can't share with you anything about that and they don't know that, that is probably a problem, and you
Yeah.
should you should go and evaluate that. But they should be able to tell you what that component is, and what is happening, and give you some numbers and show you where you're seeing that, or show you where maybe, yeah, traffic is down, let's figure that out, what do we need to do. And so I agree, doing that evaluation is important on on all aspects of your
Mhm.
business. So I did have a couple of other quick questions I want to answer before we wrap up, and that is, someone asked, how does location, urban versus suburban, influence a practice's worth? I thought that's a great question. So when we're evaluating practices, for us as partners, we're really looking at it and saying, what's the strength of the practice, the value of the numbers, and you are looking at market. So it is potential that a really small niche market, with a person, if some people are going to have trouble recruiting a doctor into that space. So if you're really, really rural, that would affect your valuation. That doesn't mean that you won't get offers or things like that, but it will affect it because the future value of the practice is not as strong. LHM, we do it a little bit differently because we're really we're coming together as a group so that we can all get a stronger valuation, or a multiple that will be stronger. So that's a little bit different, but really it does affect, because again, the question is, what's the future value of the practice? And if I'm going to have difficulty recruiting staff, or particularly providers, that will come into question. But you can answer that question, and if that question can be answered well, then, like for example, taking on a partner and showing that there's a succession plan is a great way to do that. So there are ways around it, but there is a question there. And I have one other that I saw here. If anybody, I think, so a question about how to structure the transition to see if patients and staff remain supported. How do you make sure that if you're going to do a
That's a good
transition, how that
question.
works? So that's a great question, and really one of the first ones a lot of people ask, because they're afraid, they don't want to do that. They don't want to leave. First of all, if you're really engaged with your patients, as I find most or all of the practitioners in longevity, lifestyle, and hormone medicine are very engaged. If you're that, you don't, you're really concerned about what happens to your patients. And I'm glad for that. That's one of the reasons I love this area. And so the question, so then understanding that is asking a lot of really good questions of whoever's looking to purchase of that. So if it's a single person that you're looking to sell it, single provider, then really understanding reputationally, style wise, really, are they the right fit for your patients, for your practice? Understanding more of those kinds of things and spending some time is really important. This is also important if it's any kind of group that might be looking to purchase and increase, whether it's an LHM or another group that's looking to form partnerships, or a private equity group. Asking a lot of questions about what are their expectations afterwards, Where will they be involved? Everyone will say they're not involved in clinical practice because we actually cannot be. Any entity can't be. It has to be, the practitioners who make those decisions. However, there's definitely a lot of ways people can affect your practice on the non-clinical side. And so what are the expectations there? And understanding that is really important. And that's how you make sure that there's a good transition for your patient. Asking a lot of questions, understanding if that fits with your values and the needs of your patients, and your understanding of what's going to happen are really critical to know all of those things. So I think that's really important. So and then I got another one that said, how would you increase the multiple? So that multiple is increased in several different ways. Again, if the multiple speaks to the long-term value of the practice. So if you think about, the EBITDA is a calculation of what the practice has earned and what it is worth today at this moment in time, at this snapshot. The multiple which then becomes the valuation, the multiple speaks to the longer term value of the practice. And so to increase that, a few things we mentioned just here in our discussion, some things like having a strong, stable patient base, having a great growth outlook, meaning being able to demonstrate that ongoing growth that continues to happen, being in a strong market, or being able to prove the strength and the longevity of your market itself are important things. And then how you partner is going to make a big difference in that valuation number. So again, one of the reasons we formed LHM is because a practice selling on its own is generally worth less than a practice that's in a group, or if you've got some having multiple practitioners. And the reason for that is that stability component I talked about. Again, if I'm looking at the long-term value of the practice, if I'm buying from a single practitioner, or even just even a couple of practitioners, anything happens to any of those practitioners, it significantly impacts the value of that practice immediately. And so understanding that, that's why we said if we form together and we've got now a group of practices, and that now stabilizes out, so any one is not completely dismantling the value, because we can grow a little more somewhere else, or there's ways to balance that out, and it doesn't significantly decrease the overall valuation. So that's another way that can be done. So happy to talk about that, and please reach out, and connect with us if you'd like a valuation. We're happy to do that, and we will just find us on LHM Partners. I'm Kristen Cusack. You can find me on LHM on LinkedIn. You can email me at kcusack, so KCUSACK at lhmpartners.com.
And we'll send out your contact information with the replay as well. And I will tell you guys, having gone through evaluation myself, it's expensive. If Kristen is offering to do a valuation of your practice, you are crazy, in my opinion, not to take her up on that, because I'm telling you, I want to say I spent it was in the thousands that I had to spend to get my valuation done. So, and again, I think it's just a great, even if it doesn't come out exactly right now what you want it to be, now you have a starting point to build from. So I would definitely take advantage of that. So we will send out Kristen's information on exactly how to set that up with her. And then I'm sure she'll get on a Zoom with you and kind of go over everything. And we've really had the pleasure of not only getting to meet Kristen in person, but working with some of her practices. And this just, again, it excites me because I feel like marketing is a big piece of the puzzle here. So again, if any of you guys that maybe aren't clients of Medical Marketing Whiz that want to chat a little bit about hey, how can we improve your online brand, which in turn helps your valuation, then that's always something we're happy to chat about too. So we're also going to get this it'll be on the LHM YouTube channel. We'll be sending out the replay here shortly as well. And again, Kristen, this was amazing. What a great topic. And I hope everybody got a ton of value out of it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Always
All
great
right.
talking to you.
Yep, sounds good. Then we'll get the replay out here shortly. Thanks again.
Take care.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye-bye.